Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Pinchot, and I'm an educator here at the Hispanic Society. It's my honor tonight to welcome all of you to this, the third installment of a series of talks highlighting the work of our 2022 Research Artist Fellows. On behalf of the Board of Trustees and all of the staff here at the museum, I thank you for joining us tonight. I thank you for your interest, your time, and for supporting these brilliant artists. The Hispanic Society has a rich tradition of encouraging the work of contemporary artists. In his time, our founder, Archer Milton Huntington, patronized, hosted, and honored many living artists, including painters Joaquin Sorolla, Ignacio Zuloaga, the watercolorists featured in our most recent exhibition, the photographer, Ruth Matilda Anderson, the poet, Ruben Darío, among many others. With generous support from the Vilcek Foundation, as well as from the New York State Council on the Arts, NYSCA, the Research Artist Fellow Program, under the coordination of Alex Campos, seeks to recognize and to renew that tradition of supporting living artists that remains an important part of our ongoing mission here at the Hispanic Society. Tonight, we're joined by our third featured fellow, Jessica Lagunas. Jessica was raised in Guatemala. Her work has been featured in numerous exhibitions worldwide, including the Museo Amparo in Mexico, the Museo de Arte Moderno in Medellin, Colombia, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara, the Art Museum of the Americas in Washington, El Museo del Barrio here in New York, the Bronx Museum, among others. Jessica has completed residencies at the Bronx Museum, an AIM residency in Tribeca, another at the Joan Mitchell Center in New Orleans, also at the Museo del Barrio, at Wave Hill, and at the Center for Book Arts. Currently, she is also an artist in residence at the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council's workspace residency program. Her work deals with the condition of women in contemporary society. She works with unconventional materials, with makeup, hair, perfume, thread, in projects that question our relationships with others and with ourselves. So I'll now pass the presentation to Jessica, but I'll say first that this is a live discussion. So I encourage viewers in the audience to please leave questions or comments for Jessica in the chat so that we can address those in the discussion portion of the talk. So Jessica, please, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for that introduction, and also to Margaret for supporting me during this presentation as well. A big thank you to the New York State Council on the Arts, NYSCA, for their generous and supportive grant, who let me focus this year on the work I'll be presenting tonight. Also, thanks to the Vilcek Foundation for supporting the Hispanic Society's Artist Research Fellowship. A special thanks to all the staff at the Hispanic Society who welcomed and supported us all the way. I want to dedicate this talk to Alexander Campos, the initiator of this Artist Research Fellowship program, who in late 2019 invited 10 immigrant artists with ties to Latin America and the Caribbean to be part of the program, and recognized that through his invitation, we had this wonderful opportunity to access and research the collection at the Hispanic Society. Muchas gracias, Alex. Over the years, I have worked with different techniques, of which embroidery and weaving are my favorites, and with an attraction to unconventional materials such as hair, makeup, perfume, and organic materials. This presentation will focus on that aspect, particularly on my current work with feathers, which has been revived by the inspiration from the research done this year at the Hispanic Society and generously granted by NYSCA. I want to briefly show a few past works that I find gives a bit of context to the new work. This is Por Siempre Joven, Forever Young, an ongoing live series where each year I embroider my current age on black silk using my gray hair. It started in 2004 when I turned 33, and every time it gets exhibited, it must be shown with all the years up to that moment. This is a detail of the latest age I embroidered last year. Yes, I'm currently 51. In this other series, I have been weaving using my hair to create these minimal and monochromatic pieces. I started to work on them 10 years ago. With each piece, I challenge myself to learn something new about weaving or figure out how to make something work. These works are done on a small pin loom using a needle and weaving one hair at a time. And although each piece takes many hours, I enjoy this process greatly. Here's a detail of one of the first pieces I wove with my hair. This last project with hair is a collaborative tapestry weave done using a small table loom. It led me to work in a community setting, as I have been doing this type of projects in museums or cultural institutions, asking for donations of hair from the public and the staff of the institution, and weaving it with my own hair. While working on this, some people commented how they thought the hair was actually feathers. This project is about inclusion and diversity of the community through a celebration of hair and individual expression, and by intertwining our hair together to create a communal portrait. Both of these examples were done at El Museo del Barrio in 2016, in an artist residency called Back in 5 Minutes, which was a project by artist Nicolás Dumit Esteves with the museum. Nicolás is actually the artist who will be presenting next week in this Seminar with Artists series. Moving on to other types of unconventional materials, I have been creating jewelry pieces using natural materials found in parks in New York City and covering them in gold leaf. These books of leaves were created at Wave Hill Residency Program in 2014, where I collected leaves and bound them together. In the examples on the left, I embroidered by hand the name of the trees, and for the ones on the right, I created some lace on an embroidery machine, and it refers to cellular images of plants under the microscope. Finally, some feathers. Also during this Wave Hill residency in 2014, I began creating small artworks with feathers I frequently encounter on its grounds. Now I want to focus on sharing my experience on researching at the Hispanic Society and the objects I've been inspired by. Since the beginning, I was mostly interested in their textiles collection. And although they have many pieces digitized on their website, the way to start doing research is to look into the analog card catalog. Earlier this year, during the Nuestra Casa exhibition at the Hispanic Society, I fell in love with this bishop's mitre when I read in the label that it was Featherwork mosaic, among other materials. What attracted me to this mitre has been its sheer beauty and artistry, and its exquisite technique. I want to highlight the importance of looking at artworks in person, as I had seen the object before in the Hispanic Society catalog, but completely passed it by, as I saw it as a religious object, which is not particularly my cup of tea. A mitre, mitra en español, is a tall headdress used by bishops or abbots for ceremonial purposes. This is a bishop's featherwork miter. It was acquired by the Hispanic Society at Christie's, London in 1980. It's featherwork mosaic, silk, gold, cotton, sawitli glue, which comes from the bulbous part of some orchids, amate, and maguey paper. It was made by indigenous groups either in Michoacán or Mexico City in the mid-1500s. This miter is important because it's the only, it's one of the only 7 featherworks miter, and this is the only one in the Americas. In the middle, we can see a scene based on the crucifixion with symbols of the Passion and Christ as Salvator Mundi at the top. The infule, which are the 2 long parts, has the images of Christ in majesty at the center and scenes from the flight of Egypt at the bottom. For this object to be more than 460 years old, it has aged well. We can still appreciate the vibrancy of its colors, although there had been some deterioration, particularly on the hummingbird feathers. This featherwork technique existed before the conquest of Mexico in 1521. It was mostly for Aztec dignitaries during religious ceremonies, vestments for emperor, ceremonial shields, and fly whisks. Mexican featherwork is known in Nahuatl as amatecayotl. It is also called feather mosaic, as it resembles Roman mosaics. This type of miter is compared to stained glass windows of Gothic cathedrals. I began my research in a few books and documents from the library at the Hispanic Society. I'm going to briefly read from the miter's entry in the Hispanic Society's catalog, which describes the technique. For the feather paintings, finely carded cotton was glued to a maguey leaf in order to create a sheer fabric that, when dried, was removed and used for transferring the desired picture or design by tracing. When the painted pattern had been transferred, the thin cotton sheet was glued on a sheet of coarse bark paper, qua amate, for reinforcement to produce a stencil. Once completed, the pattern was covered with glue-hardened common feathers to create a proper color background for the precious colored feathers. End of quote. The more I research about its history and technique, the more my respect and admiration grows towards the indigenous people's artistic abilities, creativity, and originality. There's a detailed description of featherwork along with the lives and traditions of the Amantecas in the Florentine Codex in Florence, Italy, written by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún with indigenous collaborators and finished in 1579. These drawings are from the Library of Congress copy of the Codex. The Amantecas were indigenous Aztecs that got their name from the Amantla neighborhood they lived in Tenochtitlan, Mexico. Also, there were other groups doing featherwork in other regions of Mexico. In the 16th century, to continue with the tradition of featherwork, Franciscan and Augustinian missionaries established trade schools in centers where featherwork was previously practiced. It flourished during this time, but now the themes were based on religious prints brought from Europe. This was also a method to convert the indigenous population to Catholicism. On the right, we can see the amate tree. Its bark is used to make amate paper. The image below is a sample detail of a sheet imported from Mexico, just as one finds nowadays in art supply stores in the US. Just recently, Dr. Margaret Connors McQuaid, Deputy Director and Curator of Decorative Arts at the Hispanic Society, was commenting that the reason I probably overlooked the miter in the first place might be because the feathers are taken out of their context. There is no recognizable element of the bird or the shape of the feather itself. Some of the feathers that were found in the miter from the Hispanic Society are from parrot, scarlet mako, great egret, hummingbird, dove, oriole, roseate spoonbill, slate-colored seed eater, oropéndola, and lovely cotinga. Unfortunately, there are no quetzal feathers in the miter, but I wanted to include it here as quetzal feathers were considered luxury materials, and they were collected from trade and from tributes paid to the Aztec Empire. And they inspire a part of a piece I will be showing you shortly. Now to my new feather works. For years, I've been collecting found feathers. With a little bit of research on the internet on how to preserve feathers, I started freezing them to kill any possible bugs and clean them by washing them with soap and water. Then I would leave them to dry overnight. Inspired by the miter in the collection and my readings on featherwork, I was eager to start experimenting working with feathers on a mate paper. This was done on a very intuitive way, mainly following my instinct. As I began gluing the feathers, I quickly noticed that they needed something else. That's when I decided to embroider on the shaft of each feather a tiny French knot, red in this case. With this type of work, I feel I'm working in a similar and abstract way as with my small weavings with hair. Without going into identity or self-expression details from a functional aspect, I find that hair and feathers are very similar. Our hair protects most of our skin, just as feathers protect the body of the birds. This is the final diptych. Each piece measures 15.5 by 23.5 inches, approximately. Each French knot indicates a feather. For me, the importance of working with natural materials is because as a city person, this brings me closer to nature, and that brings me peace. I find comfort in nature, and I feel my true self when I'm in nature. This has influenced the way I work, being more open to experimentation and letting the material dictate what it needs and wants instead of me imposing on it. I'm also letting go the strong conceptual aspect of many of my earlier works, which sometimes is a little bit challenging. I'm learning with these new types of work to listen to my intuition, to follow my instincts, and give myself permission of not having all the answers. I want the work to communicate in different ways to the viewer. A more universal language of just feeling by touching with our senses, touching with our eyes. Here are a few details of the diptych. I'm very much attracted to working with feathers because of their tactile qualities, their seduction of softness and warmth, how every line is orderly placed, and how the texture it creates is neatly combed and packed, or full of fussiness. I love the iridescence of these Muscovy duck feathers. It's hard to photograph, but iridescence is something I plan to do more research in the coming months. For the moment, I'm interested in working with natural feathers, seeing its iridescence and letting its forms and shapes dictate what I do. I also intend to continue working on these works on paper, as I have still plenty of feathers. This piece is just the first work. The other object in the textile collection that influenced me greatly is this amazing Mantón de Manila, which has beautiful hand embroideries of mostly peony flowers. I fondly refer to it as the Peony Mantón. It's embroidered on a cream silk fabric and measures around 62 inches high and 64.5 inches wide, with a fringe of 26 inches. It was a gift to the Hispanic Society by Mary Ellen Patty. The Mantón belonged to her Canadian mother, who received it probably as a wedding gift on a trip to Spain in 1922, where she went with her Spanish husband to meet the family. A Mantón is a type of hand-embroidered shawl that was done originally in China. It was brought through trade by Chinese merchants to Manila in the Philippines, and then traveled to Spain through the Manila galleon. On my first visit to the collection in August of last year, Dr. Marcus Burke, at that time senior curator at the Hispanic Society, showed me various boxes full of Mantones de Manila. And right there, I fell in love with it. One curious detail about the Peony Mantón that captivated me is that it's reversible, as it has the same embroidery on both sides of the fabric. These photos are in the conservation department, where textile conservator Anya Andreva showed Dr. Noemi Espinosa, assistant curator, and me the Mantón for a third time. To see this object multiple times and coming up close to admire the embroidery was such a treat for me. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have access to a collection that resides inside in the a museum. Being able to do research by seeing the work in person. Accessibility to the collection right there is crucial. The Peony Mantón was an inspiration for me to create my own decorative Mantón. I combine inspiration from two of my favorite objects in the collection, the Peony Mantón and the Bishop's Mitre, and decided to cover my Mantón with feathers. What you see here is a work in progress that is about 90% finished. At the center, it has a template in white for some wings that I will show you in a moment. And from there, stem feathers, each facing towards the centered wing. The majority of feathers are white from Muscovy ducks, and from the green and variegated feather. The green and variegated feathers are from lovebirds. This is a montage of how the final work will look at the end. I'm basically pending to finish half of the green fringe and attach the wings to the fabric, which is silk organza, and measures 57 inches each side. So other than the diptych with feathers I showed you earlier, this second work is also part of my NISCA grant. The wings at the center are a special gift I received in 2014 during my residency at Wakefield that I mentioned earlier, where during Open Studios, I got a visit from dear artist friend Ana Paula Cordeiro, who's actually one of the other artist fellow doing research at the Hispanic Society. She found them on Wakefield grounds while she was strolling visiting me that day. Apparently, a raptor caught a little bird, took its body, but left the wings. I have treasured these wings since then. And when I had the idea of making a Mantón, I immediately knew I wanted to include the wings, thus honoring that poor little bird. The green border is a fringe I'm doing by hand with a macrame lark's head knot, which is a basic knot that I use to attach the fringes into an inner cord of the same embroidery floss thread to create a feather effect. Remember the image of the quetzal feather I showed before? That was my inspiration for this fringe. Also, I have to mention that the quetzal is Guatemala's national bird, and I want to honor that as well in this Mantón. In my Mantón, I wanted to feature the delicacy of the feathers. And just as I did in the work on paper, all the feathers are attached to the silk organza only by its own French knot on each shaft, tightly done with a square knot on the back. These French knots are just a tiny detail, invading as minimum as possible. The thread of the French knots is cotton embroidery floss, and the different colors represents the variety of birds found in the Featherwork miter at the Hispanic Society. Some more detailed views of the work. On the right, you can see how the white feathers curve upward. This is because I intentionally flipped them to give the piece some movement. It is better appreciated when seen from the side. Also, as well as with the work on paper, working with feathers here has been done in an intuitively way, learning to listen to the materials instead of imposing them to other things. I was fortunate to find a great collaborator in Anya from the Textile Conservation Department, whom I mentioned earlier, showing me the Peony Mantón. Among the many things she helped me with greatly was examining these wings, making sure they were safe to use. And here are my other collaborators for the piece. I present you a couple of lovebird parrots who are around 7 years old. They live with my uncle in Florida, who kindly collects the feathers and ships them to me. Suspiro, the yellow male, and Selva, the green female, in the back, have donated lots of feathers over the years, but finally found a way on my feather Mantón. On the right are just a few of their feathers used in the Mantón. Now we can move to the last part of my presentation. One of the most rewarding experiences for me during the residency at the Hispanic Society was our group visits led by Noemi and Anya to the textile department, where we saw the Mantón with ivory faces on the right, and also some beautiful mantillas and hair comb. Can we go back one, Margaret, please? There. On this other visit, Noemi invited me to join artists. The next one, sorry. Next one. There. Noemi invited me to join artist Esperanza Cortez, who wanted to see this exquisite traje de luces, and Cecile Chung, interested in the Damascena casket at the upper right. Now we can move on. My other highlight was visiting the textile collection, where both Marcus and Noemi show me many mantillas. Next, there. Also the flat files, which houses lots of non-Hispanic laces, exquisite artworks themselves. Although I focus mostly on the textile collection, I also had the opportunity and pleasure of working with Vanessa Pintado, assistant curator of manuscripts and rare books, who showed me an incredible amount of books. Every visit was full of wonderful surprises and beautiful books. This is just the previous images were a minuscule sample of the books I saw during my visits to the rare book collection, just to give you a taste. But this one was one of my favorites, and I spent a lot of time studying its exquisite embroidered binding on 2 occasions. During my NISCA grant this year, I didn't have enough time, unfortunately, to focus and create work inspired by this. But it's definitely something that will inspire me in the future. Next. It is referred to as the embroidered aqua satin binding, and relates the arrival into Barcelona of Charles III, King of Spain, and Maria Amalia, Princess of Saxony, during their 6-day trip to that city in 1759. The binding of this luxurious book was commissioned to commemorate the royal family's visit, and was embroidered in a most exquisite way with gold, silk, and metal threads, using different embroidering techniques. Next, please. I spent a lot of time zooming into many details to appreciate the intricacy of the embroidery. And the last object that impressed me deeply was this novel Hispanic Mexican work from probably the 18th century that uses a technique known as hilos pegados, where silk threads are glued to a wooden board, probably with wax. It also incorporates some nácar, sequins, white and turquoise beads, metal threads, and probably a print of a painted face. It's the representation of Christ's child as Salvator Mundi. Here's a sample of different social activities that took place this year. I want to finish saying this was a dream residency for me, not only for the opportunity to create new work based on the research from the collection, but for the relationships and interactions with all the staff at the Hispanic Society, who were always inviting us to continue to come back and do research, who were incredibly welcoming and generous with their time and making us feel at home during each visit. The NISCA grant allowed me to start working again with natural materials and to discover textiles and its history in a new way. I'm very excited and grateful for this opportunity and looking forward to continue working with feathers through experimentation and patience. This is the only group photo I have with all the artists. Only Juana Valdez is missing. It was during our roundtable discussion, Artist Perspectives on the Collection, with Dr. Madeline Haddon on March of this year. She's the second from the right. To my fellow artists, thank you for your camaraderie, support, sharing, and cheering. Lastly, I want to give a shout out to Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, LMCC, Workspace Residency Program, where I have been creating the works from the NISCA grant. The images of me working in the studio were there. We'll have open studios in June 2023, where you can come and visit and see these Featherworks in person. My last and biggest thanks goes to Archer Huntington, the founder of the Hispanic Society Museum and Library, for his vision of collecting art and culture of Spain, Portugal, Latin America, and the Philippines, and to set it as a free public museum and library with a focus of promoting study and research among its collection. It has been an amazing journey for me. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That's perfect. It's a very thorough presentation, and I think you've given our guests, our viewers online, a lot of material. There's a lot here that I think they'll find unique and thought-provoking, not only in the results, which are remarkable, but also in the process that you've shown us a little bit here in your presentation. My first question for you, perhaps is building a little bit on your conclusion, speaking about the society and Archer, our founder. You know, the society is not only a place where we exhibit art, but it's also, as you've shown in your presentation, it's a research institution filled with subject experts. And you've touched on, you know, so I may be forcing you to repeat yourself a little bit, but you've touched on some of the interactions that you had with staff throughout this experience, and which is really the idea, right, of the grant and of the research fellow position as it's envisioned, right? So I'm wondering if you maybe want to elaborate a little bit more on some of those experiences and how those interactions, you know, informed your artwork.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. I want to start by saying my collaboration with Anya. She was amazing, and this is actually the first time that I'm doing an artwork where I am consulting an expert in textiles since the beginning. So I met with her through Zoom and showed her like what was my idea for the project, and she advised me so much on so many technical details. For example, she gave me a lot of input and feedback on the feathers, because originally I was going to do a lot of like long and big feathers, like hawk feathers, like very long. So she was pointing out like, oh, that's going to definitely rip the fabric and all those details. So she helped me to rethink like the types of feathers in that sense. Also, she helped me discuss like the use of glue for the Manton, which in the end I didn't end up using, because as I explained, doing the French knot on each one, it was very securely attached, so there was no need to put any glue. And there were other two aspects that she helped me a lot. One is she helped me figure out how to display the work. And that is very much in hand with how to store the work. So like, for example, in general, like I will not necessarily think of these details like right from the beginning of the piece. Rather, I will create the work and then figure it out how to do it. But this was like just amazing, like made me realize how important it is to have like very clear ideas and just to decide, okay, I prefer this way other than the other one. And in my case, I decided that I wanted to exhibit it hanging from a wall. And so it will be in following that thought. It will be easier to store because the piece will roll in itself. She also, as I pointed in my presentation, she helped me with the examining the feathers of the wing, and she helped me very much figuring out how to attach the feathers to the fabric. And she suggested using Velcro. So the idea for using Velcro on the back of the feathers and Velcro on the fabric, of course, is that we make the wings detachable. So I can store it rolled on itself and not damage anything. And the wings will live meanwhile, while they're not in exhibition, in its own proper box. And the last thing I want to say that Anya helped me immensely, and it is kind of like the one of like the biggest help like she did for me, is that she offered me to do the hem of the Mantón, which embroidering 57 inches to each side, a little bit more because the part that is going to roll, to start rolling, it's a little bit maybe 57 by 62 or 64 inches long, I can't remember. But she made it by hand, but it is so delicate, so exquisitely fine, and I could not thank her enough for this. So thank you again, Anya. So that part was very special. And the other part, very important collaboration that I want to point out, was with Vanessa. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in my presentation, I didn't have time to create an artwork based with the books that she showed me. But she was so amazing. Like every visit, she had like a pile of books waiting for me. She patiently showed everything open, like amazing. Because she knew that I wanted to focus on embroidery, a lot of the books that she showed was to show me like precise details of embroidery, either on the end papers or the binding itself, how was that done, or covers that included some embroidered stitches in. What else do I have here? Yes. Also, she showed me a lot of cartas ejecutorias de hidalguía, that disprove the origin of the nobles that says that they come from a noble family, from families and families. And these were very exquisite because a lot of them had beautiful illuminations. So that was amazing. One of the beauties that she showed me, I cannot forget to mention, is the Black Book of Hours, which I feature on some of the images. It is, obviously, I just said it's black, but the illuminations are just like exquisite with gold and silver ink. And the object is so like small and precious, like amazing. She also showed me micrography in Jewish books. And because she knows that I love weaving and embroidery, she showed me a lot of lace pattern books, which I greatly enjoyed. And there were a lot of fine books that were with gold stamping, even in the forage, or gilded with blind toolings. So that was amazing. And some of these fine books had some of the seals, like this stone seal. So that was very impressive to see up close. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's perfect. It's a good reminder, perhaps, that we always need to be asking ourselves, have we thanked a conservator or a librarian today? Because as you're saying, in your art, clearly, and in all art, it kind of takes a village, so to speak. So it's really useful for us to hear you kind of laying out that network of inspirations and collaborators, including your collaborators, Suspiro and Selva, which we'll get to, I think. But first, I want to ask a question that is somewhat perhaps building off of what you were talking about, because you were talking about how fun it was for you, I think, to incorporate the conservation perspective into your art from the beginning instead of post facto, which perhaps is important in this case because we're talking about a biological material, an environmental material, these feathers, which are so delicate, as you pointed out. And, perhaps also the work that you do with hair is also equally impermanent, or notions toward the impermanent or the ephemeral. So I was hoping maybe you might have some thoughts to share on working with these types of materials and the role of that impermanence in your work. If you see it perhaps as something bittersweet, that your work won't last forever in a sense, or if you think it enhances what you do in some way.
Yeah, I think it's bittersweet in the sense that I know that most probably it won't last. Although I have to say that hair is one of the things that lasts a very, very long time, and you can corroborate this in the excavations for many years. Like all the bones can be found, or although bones can shatter and disintegrate to pulver, to dust. But hair is something that is always like found. So I am not like so worried about the hair itself. I am more worried, for example, about like in the example of my embroidery of my age, I'm more concerned about the silk itself, that it is well protected, and so I think, and I don't know, and I don't know why exactly I am. It is not that I'm creating work because they are ephemeral, so I'm doing something with them. Like that is not the condition. It's all the way around. Is I love this material. I want to make something with them. And I have to deal with, for example, the leaves, the books of leaves. are totally brittle, so it was very difficult to work with. And I messed up a lot of them because I ruined them, basically. But also for me, it's important like to respect the material and as I was saying about talking about letting the material speak and about working with my intuition, it is a little bit of that, respecting the material and just learning to see what I can do with it. And I think with the feathers, it's mostly is more palpable for me. The sense that I want to do. I think that with feathers, they last a little bit of time, but it will not last forever. And we can see this with all the feather work all over in not only the miter at the collection, but also in so many pieces that uses feather all over the world. They are in. It's amazing that so many of us of them still survives today. But I don't know how my own pieces will preserve, and what I am mostly like kind of focused like currently, although that is on the back of my mind. I don't have the answers, but I am in this moment, I'm just focused on doing the work. I need to go ahead and do it, no matter if it's going to live 100 years or 10 years or whatever it is, it will be. The thing that I am paying very much attention is that I'm making sure to photograph the work and to have a good documentation of my work, because the work is not the photographs, it's the object itself, but the photographs is what at the end like will survive and show their work. And I want to give a shout out to my photographer, my lovely husband and artist, Ronnie McCann, who has been doing all the photography for me for all this time. So I can rest assured that I will have good photography documentation.
Yeah, I mean, your passion for the materials that you use, and that I won't even say necessarily the materials that you choose, because I think, as you've already said, and as we'll talk about now, you're kind of saying that the materials choose you to a certain extent. Yeah, I think you're kind of addressing that, like impermanent or no, what's important to me is that I work it with the materials that inspire me. So I have a question about, because it seems very much that this is a process where you're teaching yourself, let's say, how to think more ecologically or think more with your environment. And part of that, I think, has to do with your experience of just kind of living your life and allowing the materials to gather around you in a sense. There's something ecological about that, about being open to your surroundings in that way, about being open to serendipity and to chance. So I'm asking myself, what do you think that you've gained through this process of, as you said, reading leaves, reading feathers, or collaborating, as you said, with Suspiro and Selva? What do you think that you've gained through this process of thinking more ecologically, or by extension, what do you think we can gain, in that sense, through consuming this kind of arts? And I'm hoping that perhaps you can tell us more about, how you source those feathers and your process.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I have been collecting feathers for a very long time, and mostly because I just started looking at found feathers like on the street, like or when we are taking a walk in a park, we suddenly find a beautiful feather and I take it home, and I've been doing this like for years. One interesting thing other than that is that the support I get also from family and friends who knows that I love feathers and they send me feathers. So I mentioned Suspiro and Selva and my uncle in Florida, and he also sends me all the Muscovy feathers that we saw, with the ones with the dark ones with the iridescence and white ones. And I also have an aunt in Pennsylvania who has been gathering me a lot of, I think it's geese feathers or hawk feathers, like very, very long, that I have them still here. I haven't used them yet, but it's something that I want to do. And I mentioned Ana Paula Cordeiro, who gave me the little wing. So people know, and they give me, or I have my artist friend Tamara Kosenovsky. She donated me also some feathers. But the other thing with feathers is that I didn't mention in my presentation, and it's good to bring it up now, that I find is interesting, is that a lot of the white feathers, especially in the diptych, in the paperwork, are from an IKEA comforter that we got coming to New York, like around more than 20 years ago. So it is not something that I will buy now, but now that I have it, every time a feather comes out of it, I will collect it. And before starting my project this year, I actually had a bag with all the feathers that all these years have been coming out of that comforter. So I find very interesting that of me not buying feathers, because sometimes, like, I really don't know, like, where the feathers are coming from, if there is been like a harm to the animal, or there's no. So that's why my main reason to have feathers, that I know where they're coming from, if possible. So yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the work gains for you refusing to buy the feathers, right? Because that kind of chance encounter that is kind of then comes through, I think. And then so I guess I have one last question for you. Your inspiration for the featherwork is clearly, as you say, a religious object. And you said, you told a story about how you saw it on the page and it didn't call to you, in part because of this kind of religious charge that it carries. And then, even though it's not your cup of tea, you choose to work with it, which is kind of ironic, because it's religious 2 times over. The featherwork was used in the indigenous context, with religious, symbolism, referring to, sacred cosmic entities before 1492. And then that practice is then leveraged into the Christian iconography in the colonial context. So I'm wondering if you just have any comments about this aspect of your inspiration, or perhaps the spiritual aspect, how you might deal with it, either, I don't know, in yourself or through your work that you've created.
So I have to say that I don't consider myself a very spiritual person. But having said that, I remember on one occasion that I was doing the weave at the Museo del Barrio with all the hair from the donations of people. And I had a few times that people will ask if I felt the energy of hair. And it was hard to tell, like, right there in the museum, because the residency, like the space was inside the museum. So I had all day, like, coming people over and me sharing the work. So it was hard for me, like, to focus and concentrate. But when the residency finished and I came home and finished the work here, I always thought about that aspect, like if do I feel like something? And the answer is no, I didn't feel anything. But let me tell you, because what I feel when I am working with hair and that I remember who the person donated that hair, I remember our interaction, or I remember that person and think about that person. And so for me, more than spirituality is a thing of respect. Like I am very like respectful, like to the material, like treating it like very highly in that regard, because people donated their hair for the project. So that in itself is precious. I cannot say that I don't have birds, so I cannot say personally thank you to the birds. But I think that by just taking time and working with feathers and doing this French knot and all this is like a little ritual of just honoring the birds, mostly. Like they're already past, like either killed by whatever reason, but like thank you for their lives and for making us like such a beautiful experience, like visual experience if we get a chance to see them or if we get a chance to listen to their song.
Wow, that's fascinating, because while you don't attribute that relationship that you're describing to a religion necessarily, your answer sounds, quite spiritual, because you're talking about respect. You're talking about working with remains, either from humans or from these birds, and you're talking about respect. And you're talking about the sense of interconnectedness, which might in some measure kind of recreate some much of a similar sense that I assume that these indigenous artisans, for example, felt, that connection with their the materials that you're working with. And growing up in Guatemala, for example, I mean, perhaps these questions of these people asking you about this energy in the hair might not surprise you so much, because you may have seen, in churches, you will often come across religious figurines with the hair, as still human hair, right? Yes. In the artwork. So it's quite common in some ways to be used in that way. But that's fascinating what you're saying about honoring the participants, and that's excellent. I think that's about all the time that we have, unless you have anything to add, Jessica.
No, just thank you for everyone tuning in for their time. I really appreciate that.
We appreciate you. It's been a pleasure having you here tonight and interacting with all the staff across your fellowship. So I thank you very much, and I thank you everyone for attending tonight. And I hope that everyone has a good evening.
Thank you, Ryan and Margaret. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.